here. What they are simply about emission spectrum, absorption spectrum. Two more spectrums are there. Everything is a combination of wavelength, any type of spectrum. Generally, what you are observing in the sky, that is rainbow, visible spectrum, electromagnetic spectrum, entire range of frequencies. This emission and absorption spectrum, depending upon the energy, right? That spectrum is due to the energies, not the other, right? So they are only explained here in terms of wavelengths or frequencies, that absorption and emission of energies. So let us look at them, right? So now I'm going for the emission spectrum, right? So emission spectrum meaning is what? Emission, emitting, releasing, right? So releasing what? Energy. So that energy you are expressing in terms of wavelength or frequency, right? So that radiation we need to calculate. So spectrum produced by the emitted radiation, by the heat energy or by the light energy. So that radiation may be lost sometimes in the form of heat or light. So that is here simply given as emission spectrum. Spectrum produced by the emitted radiation is known as emission spectrum. So here simply emission spectrum is here corresponding to the radiation, right? That emitted energy evolved in the form of heat when an electron is excited or returned back, right? That excited electron returned back to the ground state. So here, higher level to lower level, if you are jumping, then your energy loss. So generally, outside, not in case of atom, if you are coming from higher level to lower level, your potential energy decreases. Higher level to lower level, your potential energy decreases. Likewise, within the atom also, in the atom, electrons are jumping. If it is jumping from higher level to lower level, its energy also decreases. That decreasing energy lost in the form of radiation, that energy evolved in the form of heat and light, calculated in terms of h nu. That is only Max Planck proposed, equal to h nu. So you can calculate that energy is equals to h nu, that is emitted by the electron when it retained to its ground state. So ground state is what? That what the average energy is available with the electron, that is called its ground state. If it is more than that, called as excited state. If it is ghost, lower level, right? It is only the lower level, not ghost lower level, right? Ground state is lower level and gaining energy goes to the higher level. So likewise, we can say. So emission spectrum will be look like this. Emission spectrum will be look like this. It is corresponding different lines formed by the different colors, right? Then you have here dark background, dark background. So this you can observe. This is called line spectrum because that wavelength, that's why here you can be also called as emission, right? There is no difference. Okay, so this is the reason. This is the reason to correspond. Just a second. So now we observed emission lines or emission line spectrum. Have you seen now? It is clarified. It is clarified now. What is emission spectrum? In your textbook, just emission spectrum mentioned, but not given, I think, clearly. I have given the information and visualization of emission line spectrum. Have you got? Emission line spectrum is defined simply by the name. Emission, releasing. What it is releasing? Energy in terms of heat and light. That radiation will be visualized by the powerful spectroscopes as like this, as you see on the screen. That is only here called as emission spectrum. Then we'll go for another absorption spectrum. When the energy is absorbed, that can give you something radiation. Its energy is increased. So produced by the absorbed radiation here. Spectrum produced by the absorbed radiation called absorption spectrum. So when the energy released, emission spectrum, when the energy absorbed in terms of radiation, That is also give you a spectrum called as absorption spectrum. Look at this absorption spectrum. What the difference is there between emission and absorbed line spectrums? Can you feel the difference now? Here in the emission spectrum, you have dark background, black colored regions in between the corresponding lines. But in this, you can see dark lines and color bands. In the absorption spectrum, you are finding dark lines and colorful regions in between them. But in the emission lines or emission spectrum, you can see dark regions and colored lines corresponding the wavelengths. This is the difference between emission spectrum and absorption spectrum, right? Emission spectrum and absorption spectrum, right? So any confusion in between emission spectrum and absorption spectrum, ask me. I think it is clear. What is emission spectrum? What is absorption spectrum? Vikrant. 10th class especially. Kaushik. Rohan. Rohit. Kaushik, are you there in the class? No response. Right. So here, now we'll go for another here. So we got an idea about emission spectrum and absorption spectrum. Then now the discussion is about continuous spectrum. What this continuous spectrum? So here continuous spectrum is nothing. When sunlight is passed through the prism, what you can see, there is no lines, only the corresponding colors you are observing, right? So that light can be dispersed into continuous bands of different colors. When the light passes through the prism, light gets dispersed into continuous bands of different colors. So here that is called as continuous spectrum here. If the light of an incandescent object, that is only here simply prism, that is resolved. That means here that wavelengths are separated. Why they are separated, sir? Actually due to the velocity change. That velocity change splitting the colors according to Fermat's principle. Each color chooses its different paths. That's why the deviation is given by the different colors differently. So more deviation for violet color, less deviation for red color. So that's why you can get different colors here, violet to red color with GYO. So through the spectroscope, it is giving you continuous spectrum. So that you observe through the powerful spectroscopes, you can see continuous color bands. So that is here given you on the screen. Can you feel the difference now between emission spectrum, absorption spectrum, and continuous spectrum? Everyone. Have you got the difference between emission, absorption, and continuous spectrum? Emission spectrum corresponding the dark regions and bright colors, right? Then absorption spectrum consisting colorful regions, dark lines. But continuous spectrum, no lines, only bands, no dark spots, right? So like this, you can visualize the spectrum, right? Continuously. So without any color bands, without any dark regions. So only we can see spreaded colors. So this is especially about continuous spectrum. Then one more is there. That is what line spectrum. So line spectrum is nothing but maybe it is emission line spectrum or continuous, absorption line spectrum, right? There are two types in line spectrum. So it is consisting lines. It is consisting lines. So here that lines, maybe you can see that as dark lines or colorful lines, right? So line spectrum, if the radiations obtained by the excitation of a substance are analyzed by the lines with help of spectroscope is a series of thin bright lines of a specific color. So it may be violet or blue, indigo, red, yellow, orange, green, whatever it may be, right? So that are obtained here as a dark space between two consecutive lines called a light spectrum, right? So dark space covered between two consecutive lines called a light spectrum. So how you can see that line spectrum here? This is simply using a powerful spectroscope. Here you can see emission line spectrum is like this. Absorption, you can see colorful bands with the dark colored lights, right? So these are about spectrums. So everything is clear about the spectrum, or there any doubt remained in it? Everything is fine about the spectrum. So please read this information today only. Otherwise, you will be remain again with the confusion. What is emission spectrum? What is absorption spectrum? What is light spectrum? So everything is about simply combination of wavelengths, but that observation using the spectroscope is differently. That spectrum observing with the spectroscope differently. So based on the observation, that can be named as emission, absorption, light spectrum, continuous spectrum, visible spectrum, electromagnetic spectrum differently, right? So every spectrum is explained, I think, clearly from my side. Maybe how you are feeling from your side, I don't know, right? So today I'm going to stop this class at here. After this, we are entering into a new topic that is here about the models, how to arrange, how to investigate that location of electron, how to differentiate one atom with the another atom. That particularly we are understanding with the help of models. So that we are discussing in tomorrow's class. So in tomorrow's class, we will cover Bohr's model and Sommerfeld model. Possible means I will cover quantum mechanical model also. Right? So give me your response quickly.